Znamo li doista što se zbiva s nama i oko nas? Ako i mislimo da znamo, ipak se možemo zapitati koja je prava pozadina šokantnih novinskih naslova, nepredviđenih političkih dogovora i neočekivanih erupcija kriza i ratova. Nije li prirodno pomisliti da postoje tajni vladari svijeta koji bez našeg znanja nastoje povećati svoju moć i centralizirati poredak svijeta da bi ga lakše nadzirali? Je li toliko neprihvatljiva pomisao da nekolicina ljudi uz kavu dogovara podjelu interesa i procese iz kojih će korist izvući samo za sebe? Je li doista istrošeno izreći tu riječ? Urota. Ako ta urota, čija je namjera da svijet ustroji prema sve većoj globalnoj kontroli, doista postoji, onda ona mora imati puno segmenata. A svijet je presloženo mjesto da bismo tako veliku operaciju mogli obuhvatiti jednim pogledom. Ali metodom mnogo malih koraka to je moguće. David Icke, slavni istraživač urote, smatra da je jedna od tih poluga i Europska unija. David nije prvi put s nama, već smo s njim prošli osnovne korake razotkrivanja urote. Neki na to odmahuju rukom, drugi gorljivo prihvaćaju. Ako je sve to pogrešno, zabavit ćemo se. Ako je točno, bit ćemo nešto mudriji i oprezniji. Na kraju krajeva i liječnici savjetuju pacijentima da potraže drugo mišljenje. Što pričaju masovni mediji o Europskoj uniji više manje znamo. Za drugo mišljenje upitali smo Davida Ickea ovdje kod nas, na Rubu znanosti. Dobar dan, opet u studiju na Rubu znanosti. Vaše knjige daju nam sasvim drugačiji pogled na povijest, svašta se iz njih može iščitati, pa tako i to da živimo u vremenu u kojem su tendencije prema koračanju, prema globalnoj diktaturi izraženije nego ikada i na svim kontinentima. Mi naravno živimo na ovom europskom kontinentu, pa zapravo pitanje i tema današnje emisije jest, na temelju vaših knjiga i istraživanja, kakva je pozadina nastanka Europske unije?
Well, I've been researching the European Union for a long, long time. And coming from Britain, we've been aware of that going way back because there was many years when there was an argument over whether Britain would go in or when de Gaulle in France was saying no and all the rest of it. And then along came this man called Ted Heath, who became Prime Minister in I think 1970 to 74. And he has been pressing for British membership for a long time. He becomes Prime Minister and he signs us into what was the European community, the common market. So from the early 70s, I think it was about 73 we went in, I've watched this unfold in Britain. And the effect has been devastating in so many ways in terms of control and dictatorship and laws and regulations. And so when I started investigating the conspiracy from the early 90s, one of the areas of focus, because of my background in Britain, was what is the European Union as it's become? What's behind it? Because the foundation of the global conspiracy that I've been exposing all these years is to centralize power for a simple reason. If you have lots of diversity of decision making, then any central few are not going to have power over all that diversity. There's too many points for them to control to get the decisions that they want. So what you need if you're a dictator, look at any dictatorship, look at communism, look at fascism, look at any of these forms of dictatorship, and what do they want? Centralization of power, dictating to everyone and everywhere, because only then can you have that central power where what you say and what you decide affects everybody. Now, once I'd started to realize that centralization of power, and of course on a global level, we now have a name for it, it's gone so far, globalization. Globalization is simply the agenda and the conspiracy that I've been exposing all these years. We now have a name for it. And so once you realize that centralizing power is key to it, then you've got to look at the European Union. Because what is that? there was a time when people were gathered together in tribes. And in that tribal situation, they made decisions that affected the tribe. Compared with the world today, few people were deciding their own fate in so many ways. Then you had the movement to gather those tribes together under a central rule, and we called those nations. What we call nations, there was the gathering together of different tribes. So now, the central rule of the nation, what we call the government, is now deciding at that central point what happens to the lives of all those tribes that formerly were deciding their own destiny and making their own decisions. Now, because this conspiracy is a stepping stone movement towards a global dictatorship, then the constant movement to further centralization is essential to bring that about. So what we now started, or then started to see through the European Union, was the gathering together of nations under a central dictatorship, central rule. And of course, after the war, when tens of millions of people had been killed and maimed to stop a centralized dictatorship in Europe under the Nazis from becoming real, you had a situation where if those that wanted this European Union centralized state that we have now had come out after the last war or in the 1950s and said, okay, we want to reform the government of Europe. We want centralized control. We want a bureaucracy which we'll put in Brussels, which will dictate to the whole of Europe. We're going to have a situation where that bureaucracy, whatever it decides, overrides any laws decided by national parliaments. We're going to have a president of Europe who is going to become the central figure of authority. We're going to have a foreign minister for the whole of Europe. We're going to decide foreign policy for the whole of Europe. We're going to have a European army. On and on it would go. What would people have said after the last war and in the 1950s? Hold on a second. We've just fought a war to stop that. Because Hitler wanted something similar, a United States of Europe. So they didn't tell us that, even though right from the start, as my research shows in great detail, that was the plan. So what do? They use what I call the totalitarian tiptoe. You're here, and you know you're going there, but you know if you go there too quickly, people will say, hold on, what's going on? Because the change is so great. So what you do first is you say, we're going to have a free trade zone. And it won't take anything away from you, won't touch your sovereignty, but it will be great for jobs. We're going to bring trade barriers down. It'd be really good. Okay, all right. And then you start. Well, you know, this free trade zone, yeah, it would be much more kind of efficient and work better if we had a few rules that everybody had to obey. Okay, you're moving. And over this period, from the 50s up to now, incessantly you've seen this stepping stone of more and more centralization of power in the European Union. And this Lisbon Treaty now, that the Irish have at least postponed by voting against it, that will massively increase the centralization of power. For a time, you had what they called the veto, where a country could veto the introduction of a European law if it didn't agree with it. That whole process of countries vetoing the laws is now being eroded rapidly, and what they want to get to is a place where there is no veto. If you're in the European Union, what the central bureaucracy, like the Politburo, that's all it is in the former Soviet Union, says is going to happen, and you're going to have no say or veto of stopping it affecting your country. So you see this and how it fitted perfectly, the European Union, with this centralized global dictatorship that I've been exposing. So when I started looking behind it, the same organizations, the same families that are behind and have been behind so much, including the manipulation of the Second World War, turn out to be the people behind the European Union. And crucial to understanding the background is an organization called the Pan-Europa movement. Now, this goes back to the 1930s at least. And the Pan-Europa movement is an organization controlled by the Habsburg family, the Habsburg dynasty. And it still exists today, and Otto von Habsburg is still the head of it. And it was that organization in the background that manipulated the movement, first of all, to the free trade zone, and then, of course, through the decades, as I've described, to this centralized superstate that we have now. And here we are in Croatia, which ended, it thought, Habsburg rule, Habsburg dictatorship. And now the government of Croatia, and I understand the main opposition parties too, they should be absolutely ashamed of themselves, the way that they are pushing this forward without any public debate and clearly no questioning or looking at the background to what this is all about. They are proposing to sign back, in effect, control of this country to the Habsburg dynasty and their connected families and groups that are actually the force behind the European Union. And the same technique is being played all over the world. We now have an African Union, which is being more and more moved to becoming a whole of Africa dictatorship. We now have the African Union Army. More and more rules and laws are coming in Africa that dictate to every African country. In America, we have a free trade zone called the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, between Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and that is now very close to being turned into the North American Union, their version of the European Union, when the Canadian and American dollars and the Mexican peso will be replaced by another currency which has at least a working title of the Amero. And they want to do the same as they're doing in the European Union and in Africa and America in the Pacific, where they have a free trade zone called Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, and they want an Asia Eastern, Australian, etc. version of the European Union. So eventually what they want is to pick off every single country in the world into one of these unions, and these unions will answer to the world government. Crucially also, they've produced the maps. The European Union has done this. They want to break nation states up into regions. And they'll sell it as if it's diversity of power, when really what they're doing is breaking up any unity of response to this edifice of superstate and world government power by breaking up nation states that exist today into regions. And in the map they produce for Northern Europe, the European Union, it was in a British newspaper, they've taken regions of Britain, and in the way that they've constructed the regional structure, they've taken regions of England and other parts of Britain, and they've put them together not with other regions in Britain, but with regions in Scandinavia or a region in France. They want the end of the nation state. And Croatia has no idea what it is about to let itself in for, and its government and opposition parties are a disgrace that they are allowing this sleepwalk to happen to the, in terms of Croatian culture and sovereignty and ability to make its own decisions. That sleepwalk is heading very fast for the edge of a very, very deep cliff.
Na to ćemo još doći na kraju emisije. U međuvremenu bih vas pitao kakva je uloga Božice Europe koju toliko često spominjete u knjigama i koju ste posvetili dosta prostora?
Well, again, this fits into the whole structure that I've been exposing all these years because many years ago now, I picked up this stream through history of the Babylonian trinity of a goddess, moon goddess, they symbolize her as, called Semiramis, their sun god, Nimrod, who's also known as Bel or Baal in the ancient world, and their virgin-born son in Babylon, this is thousands of years BC, long before Christianity, called Tammuz. And the Babylonian trinity was moved eventually and relocated from Babylon to Rome under the Roman Empire, and that became Almighty God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, which we call Christianity. The Son became Jesus instead of Tammuz. And the Holy Spirit, or Holy Ghost, was symbolized, or is symbolized, as a dove, which is precisely what the goddess of Babylon in that Babylonian trinity was symbolized as. Also, all the attributes that the Babylonians gave to Semiramis, their goddess figure, of the Virgin Mother, the Queen of Heaven, and all the rest of it, they were all put onto Mother Mary when the Babylonian religion was relocated to Rome under another name. And this is why the holy days of the Roman Church and Christianity are the same holy days as they had in Babylon thousands of years earlier. They've just called them different names and used different kind of hero figures and put it in a different historical context. Now, these family bloodlines that are behind the European Union and are behind this centralization of global power, this gathering Orwellian state, actually come out of what is now Iraq, formerly Babylon, and before that it was Sumer Babylon in Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers. And as those bloodlines have moved out of that area and up into Northern Europe, where they became the aristocracy and royal families of Europe, and then they moved into the political realm and the banking realm and these institutions that dictate to the world today, they took with them their religion and their rituals. And right at the heart of that is this Babylonian trinity, and the goddess figure, Semiramis, is really crucial to that. Give you a very obvious example. As these bloodlines moved up into Northern Europe and the area we now call France, of course they took all these things with them. And when the bloodlines expanded across to the Americas during the European empires of Britain and France, etc., obviously they took their bloodlines, their family network there, and they continue to control America, but they also took the rituals and the goddess and of everything. And when you look at the way that this Babylonian goddess, Queen Semiramis, was depicted in the ancient world on coins and things, it is an absolute mirror image of the Statue of Liberty. And why would that be? Because the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor was given to New York by French Freemasons, part of the secret society web that the bloodlines used to manipulate the world. It was given to New York by French Freemasons in Paris who knew what the Statue of Liberty really represented. And it wasn't liberty, it was the goddess of Babylon. And she's holding a flame, which is the symbol in Babylon of Nimrod, the sun god of Babylon. And in Paris to this day, on an island in the River Seine, is a mirror image of the Statue of Liberty. It's extraordinary when you go there and you look at it. And you know, if your eyes were shut and someone said, okay, open your eyes, and you looked up, where are you? You'd say, I'm in New York. Look, it's Statue of Liberty. No, it's on the River Seine in Paris. And you see this recurring symbol of the goddess, particularly with the spikes around the head, all over the world. Like the goddess of the French Republic is Semiramis depiction. The goddess of the District of Columbia, where Washington is in America is Semiramis. Again, the depiction. Now, when you start to look around the ancient world, it seems to be just an explosion of gods and goddesses under different names and stuff like this. The goddess of this and the goddess of that and the goddess of the other. Oh my goodness, so complicated. I can't follow this. Once you realize that as this Babylonian Trinity religion moved through Europe, all they did was take that and use different names for the same deities. So all across Europe and the wider world, you see all these deities and goddesses and gods under different names, but they're the same deities, the Babylonian deities, just called different names. And one of them is Europa, the goddess Europa. That's what Europe is named after. Now, we've talked before about the obsession that these bloodlines have with symbolism. Well, it just so happens that one of the key symbols for the Babylonian goddess under different names is 12 stars in a circle, which just happens to be, sits back in amazement, the symbol of the European Union. Who decided that was going to be the symbol of the European Union? Those that manipulated into place the European community, which became the Union. And of course, it's the symbol of their goddess, in this case, Europa. And so they use their symbol right at the heart of the logo of the European Union. And that is saying something. That is saying this is the realm or the union of the Babylonian goddess, which symbolizes these bloodlines and their control. And when you look at the ancient stories about Europa, who again is Semiramis under a different name, they tell the story of how she, as a woman, rode on the back of this bull, which is a symbol of Nimrod. So it's Europa Semiramis riding on Nimrod. And 2005, the European Union brought out a commemorative coin which depicted Europa and the bull, Semiramis and Nimrod from Babylon, on it. And the people behind that knew exactly what they were symbolizing. And so we now have this situation where this organization, which was created by these bloodlines, really at the heart of it, the Habsburgs, which connect into the Rothschilds, etc., they've set basically a fishing net or a spider's web. You can symbolize it in many ways. And there it sits. And then countries come in and they get caught in the web. And once they get caught in the web, the legislative laws, rules and regulations of that country immediately start to change dramatically and come under European law. And then everything is so connected to everything else in Europe that even if anybody wanted to get out, they are so glued to the European Union structure by then through finance and business and all the rest of it, they can't get out. So what I would say to the people of Croatia, you are making a forever decision here, certainly forever in the terms of lifespans that we're talking about, going into the European Union. Because once you're in, if you're saying, oh, we don't like this, let's get out, oh, forget that. Because you're going to be in the web so fast legislatively and in terms of dependency that there is no, oh, let's get out. So, again, when you put all this together, this is happening in this country, certainly at a political level, with absolutely no debate. Okay, let's see the good things and let's see these other things. No, oh, we're just going in. Over the cliff.
Na predavanju u Zagrebu pokazali ste neke fotografije zastave Europske unije u Zagrebu i drugdje. Zanima me gdje ste ih uslikali i na koji način biste zapravo opisali kako se ulazak u Europsku uniju održava na svakodnevni život ljudi?
Well,
pretpostavljam da imate nešto iskustva.
it's strange to me. Well, not strange because I know how the system works, but it's amazing to me, if I didn't know how the system worked, that I look around Zagreb at parliament buildings and government buildings, and what I see is next to the Croatian flag, I see the European Union flag flying next to it. Croatia's not even in the European Union yet, and I understand this has been going on for quite a time. And what that is symbolic of is that this is a done deal. You know, there is an agenda to enslave through this union every country in Europe, and further out. They want to expand as far out as they can. And this is not we will try to persuade people that it's good to join the European Union. This agenda is you're going to join. And by the way, we're not going to persuade you to agree to more and more centralization of power in Europe. We are going to do it, okay? And we're seeing this now in Ireland. To keep this thing moving, they had to have get-out clauses in the early days so that people were a bit more comfortable about going in. For instance, I mentioned earlier, the veto. If you go into a union of nations, and at least you know you have a veto, if the union decides something that is going to adversely affect your country, or it's something you don't want, you have this veto. You can say, no, I'm blocking that, and I have the power to do. Now, that was to get people in and moving. Now, they're, like I say, removing the veto. So eventually, the bureaucracy in Brussels will be a dictatorship with no way of overcoming that and denying its omnipotence. One of those checks and balances up to this point, and they're about to destroy this, was that major constitutional changes, etc., had to be agreed by every nation for them in the Union to become law. And the idea was that, well, we're going to control the people and the governments of the nations, so it's not a problem. We'll give them that, but it's not really a check and balance because we'll get the government to agree to do what we ask. But on one or two occasions, there was one in Holland, there was one in France, and more recently in Ireland, those countries had referendums giving the people the opportunity to vote on whether they wanted to give still more centralized power to the European Union. So they wanted to bring in this, what they now call the Lisbon Treaty. But it was originally called the European Constitution. So the Dutch and the French in their referendums voted against the Constitution and said, no, we don't want it. Now, because of this law, which they're now getting rid of, that meant the Constitution couldn't happen. So what did they do? They took 98%, this is from European Union people, 98% of what that Constitution said, and they called it not a constitution, they called it a treaty, the Lisbon Treaty. And those countries that had promised their people a referendum on the Constitution, like Britain, and the British government knows if it had a vote, a referendum on the Constitution, they'd lose. So what they then said is, oh no, we don't have to keep our promise anymore to give you a referendum on the Constitution because the Constitution's dead. It's just the treaty now. And we didn't promise we'd give you a referendum on the treaty, but the Constitution. So that's how they get round it. And they've got round that by saying, oh no, the Dutch and the French, they voted against the Constitution. We're now talking about this treaty, which is just 98% of the Constitution, right? So now we come to the Irish, and a very wealthy man funded a campaign in Ireland to let the Irish people see far more about the real background to the European Union than they would normally get. The Irish voted against having this treaty happen. So in a democracy, which of course the European Union isn't, it's a farce, you would say, well, that's you know, we did our best, but the Irish have vetoed. No, they're now pressing the Irish, and you watch it happen, they're pressing the Irish government to have another referendum in Ireland on the same question. And what they then do, they did this in Denmark, is they look at those areas where they can undermine the no campaign enough to cross the line. Now, when the line is crossed, in other words, they've now got the decision they want, no one's then going to say, well, let's have another referendum because, you know, we've had two and one went this way. No, we've got the result we want now. They've said, yes, we can introduce this further centralization, no more referendums. And, of course, as I've said before, the more you centralize power, the more power you have to centralize even quicker. So as they centralize more power in Europe, they then have the power to say, from the center, we're bringing an end to all this veto stuff. We're bringing an end to all this, you'll have a referendum to say yes or no to great constitutional and centralization of power. All that's dead, okay? We're ruling now. And, you know, I've said in my talks when I come to Croatia that people talk about troops massing on the border, waiting to invade a country. Well, there is something amassing on the border of Croatia now. And it's not troops and tanks, it's legislation. And it is a tidal wave that is going to hit this country of 5 million people in a European Union of 500 million people. And people in Croatia are going to be staggered by the way this country changes after the government, if the people allow it, sign Croatia into the European Union. Whenever you look at these institutions and structures of these families that are behind this conspiracy, it is just like a spider's web. They catch people in a mountain of laws, rules, and regulations, sub-clauses, fine detail. I mean, the vast, overwhelming majority, I'd say 99% of legislation that is passed by politicians is legislation they have never read. And so the people who write the legislation decide what's in it. And then what happens is the politicians are given certain headlines about and a summary of what's in it, because they never read it. And then they have the debate over these headlines. But in the depth and the detail of this legislation is fantastically detailed impositions of do's and don'ts and can'ts and mustn'ts and all the rest of it, which gets passed but is never talked about. And then people go, hold on a second, what do you mean I can't do this? That's in subclause 7B/457. Here, look. You never told me about this. It was in the legislation you voted for. And from the time that Britain went into the what is now the European Union in 73, I have watched this European Union legislation just get added to and added to and added to and added to the point where it is now dictating the fine detail of the lives of people in Britain, and 75% and growing of the laws that are introduced in Britain today originate with the bureaucrats, unelected by the way, in Brussels, and not even with elected politicians. And now, we at least, who've been in the Union for a long time, have had the ability to go with this stepping stone and see it added to. This is what is amassing on the border of Croatia. All that mountain, tidal wave, however you want to symbolize it, of legislation that has been built up in the European Union since its creation as a common market. That's amassing on the border. And soon as your leaders go, we're in, they invade. That legislation invades this nation of 5 million people. You have no idea what that means, because people are going to be staggered by how their ability to live and the decisions they can make and the impositions on you can't do this, you can't do that, are going to impact on their lives when this starts. The end of Croatia as you know it. Because we in Britain are a country of nearly 70 million people. And we have been absorbed and dictated to by these bureaucrats. Croatia is a country of 5 million people. It's going to be swallowed whole by these people. And the government of Croatia is having no debate. It is an absolute national disgrace. And if people do not start to look at this, then they should not complain when the tidal wave hits them, as it will.
Hvala, Davide. Imamo još 2-3 minute. To je daleko premalo za jedno pitanje koje biste vi mogli odgovoriti. Stoga vam zahvaljujem na sudjelovanju. Nadam se da se opet vidimo za koji mjesec s nekom drugom temom iz bogatog asortimana zakulisnih igara. Hvala vama na gledanju i doviđenja do sljedeće urote.